The mountain was quiet that morning. A thick layer of fog drifted slowly between the pine trees, wrapping my mansion in silence. From up there, the world felt distant, no traffic, no neighbors, no noise. Just stone, timber, and sky. Then the sound came. Engines. Not one. 3. I stepped onto the balcony and saw 3 black SUVs crawling up the private road that led to my gate, a road I paid for, maintained myself, and never shared with anyone. They stopped abruptly. Doors opened. And that's when I saw her. A middle-aged woman in a sharp blazer stepped forward, clipboard tucked under her arm, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She didn't look around. She didn't admire the view. She looked straight at my house, like she already owned it. Behind her stood 2 men in matching jackets. HOA inspectors. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask permission. She pointed at my mansion and said calmly, "This structure violates HOA regulations. Demolition has been ordered." For a second, I thought I misheard her. Demolition? I laughed, short, confused, almost instinctive. "This is private property," I said. "You're standing on land that doesn't belong to your HOA." She finally looked up at me and smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that says this conversation is already over. "We'll let the court decide," she replied. "You have 30 days. She handed me a thick envelope stamped with legal language, deadlines, and threats, words designed to scare, not explain. As they turned back toward their vehicles, she stopped and added one last line. "If you interfere with this process, fines will begin immediately." The SUVs drove away, disappearing into the fog. I stood there alone, holding a demolition order for a house that had stood longer than their HOA even existed. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about safety. This was about power. And they had just picked the wrong property to test it on. Before we go any further, take a second and drop your country or city name in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, because situations like this aren't limited to one place. And if you believe that no HOA, no authority, and no group should ever have more power than the law, hit the like button and subscribe. This channel exists to expose real stories where ordinary people stand up to intimidation and win. That mountain property had always been private. Long before any HOA signs appeared downhill, the land was surveyed, registered, and approved directly through the county. There were no shared roads, no community rules, and no governing board, just clear boundaries and legal paperwork. When I decided to build the mansion, everything was done by the book. Permits were issued. Inspections were passed. The structure complied with county safety codes from foundation to roof. There was nothing rushed, nothing hidden, and nothing unofficial about it. At the time, there was no HOA anywhere near the property. Years later, luxury cabins and gated developments started appearing lower on the mountain. That's when the HOA was formed, long after my house was already standing, long after my paperwork was finalized. But from the top of the mountain, none of that changed my reality. My road was still private. My utilities were still independent. And my land was still legally outside any HOA boundary. Or at least, that's what the records clearly showed. Which made their demolition order even more confusing. Because if the law was on my side, and I knew it was, then the real question wasn't whether my mansion violated HOA rules. It was why they were pretending those rules applied to me at all. The HOA didn't arrive quietly. It started with signs appearing along the lower road, polished metal plaques announcing of private community, complete with cameras, guard posts, and strict entry rules. Expensive homes followed. Uniform designs. Matching fences. Identical roofs. Control was the real foundation. At the center of it all was the HOA president, the same woman who stood at my gate. She ran the board with absolute authority, speaking in firm sentences and smiling only when people agreed with her. To her, rules weren't guidelines. They were weapons. At first, the HOA ignored my property. Then the complaints began. They claimed my mansion broke the visual harmony of the mountain. They said the structure was too visible from below. According to them, my house didn't match their aesthetic vision: dark glass, stone walls, wide balconies. It stood out. And that bothered them. The first notice arrived by mail. It wasn't aggressive. Just informational. A polite reminder that new HOA standards were being enforced. I ignored it. My land wasn't theirs. That's when the tone changed. Inspectors started showing up without notice. They parked near my road, taking photos from a distance, pointing at my house as if cataloging violations that didn't exist. One afternoon, I found a drone hovering near my roofline, operated, they later admitted, by an HOA contractor. Then came the claims. They accused my mansion of violating setback rules that were never approved. They questioned my permits, despite county records confirming everything was legal. They even suggested my home posed a landslide risk, conveniently ignoring geological reports that had already cleared the site years earlier. None of it was about safety. It was about control. The HOA wanted the mountain to look the way they decided. And my mansion, standing alone above their development, was a reminder that they didn't own everything. Neighbors downhill were afraid to speak up. I could see it in their eyes during brief encounters. Fines. Threats. Liens. The HOA ruled through pressure, not cooperation. And the president made one thing very clear during a brief exchange at the gate. Everyone up here will follow the same standards, she said. No exceptions. That's when I understood the real agenda. If they could force me to comply, if they could make my mansion disappear, they could claim the entire mountain as theirs. And they were willing to push as far as it took to make that happen. The official notice didn't arrive quietly. It came by certified mail, sealed in a thick envelope stamped with legal warnings and bold lettering designed to demand attention. The kind of paperwork that makes your chest tighten before you even open it. Inside was a multi-page document titled Order of Demolition and Compliance. According to the HOA, my mountain mansion was now classified as an unauthorized structure. They claimed it violated newly established community standards, zoning restrictions, and environmental guidelines, rules that didn't exist when my house was built and, more importantly, rules they had no authority to enforce on my land. The document laid out a clear threat. I was given 30 days to either demolish the structure myself or face forced action. If I failed to comply, the HOA would arrange demolition at my expense, place liens on the property, and pursue additional remedies through legal channels. Every sentence was written to intimidate. There were references to fines, daily penalties, and enforcement costs that climbed into six figures. They cited legal codes without context, hoping I wouldn't check whether they even applied to me. At the bottom of the notice was a signature. Her name. The HOA president. That same cold confidence I'd seen at my gate was now printed in ink. A week later, she returned, this time with a contractor and a man carrying a camera. They stood just outside my gate, documenting my home like it was already condemned. You still have time to make this easy, she said. Voluntary compliance always looks better. I asked her one simple question. Under what authority? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she repeated the deadline. Then came the follow-up letters. One warned of immediate fines. Another threatened court action if I attempted to challenge the order. A third suggested that resisting demolition could be interpreted as willful noncompliance. It was pressure layered on pressure. They wanted fear to do the work for them. But the more they pushed, the clearer it became. This wasn't enforcement. It was an attempt to erase something they couldn't control. And standing there, holding an order that demanded I destroy my own home, I realized the next move mattered more than anything. Either I backed down, or I fought back. Once the demolition order was issued, the pressure became constant. Almost daily. Emails started arriving from the HOA's legal department, short, formal messages reminding me of deadlines and consequences. Each one ended the same way: failure to comply will result in further enforcement. Then the fines appeared. Small at first. A few $100s labeled as administrative violations. A week later, the amounts doubled. The HOA claimed penalties were accumulating automatically, even though the demolition order was already being disputed. Inspectors began showing up more often. Sometimes they stood at the edge of my private road with clipboards. Other times they parked nearby and took photographs from a distance. Once, I caught a drone hovering low over the property again, slowly circling the roof like it was mapping the structure for destruction. Neighbors downhill stopped making eye contact. When I did manage to speak to one of them, he lowered his voice and said, "They did the same thing to me. I paid because I couldn't afford to fight." That was their strategy. Overwhelm. Exhaust. Isolate. A letter arrived from the HOA's attorney warning that if I continued to interfere with lawful enforcement, they would seek emergency court approval to proceed with demolition without further notice. Another letter suggested placing a lien on the property. The message was clear: comply quietly, or we will bury you in legal trouble. Even contractors I'd worked with before started backing away. One admitted he'd been contacted by the HOA and warned not to assist me. Another simply stopped returning calls. They were closing every door. But intimidation has a flaw. It only works when the target believes the threat is legitimate. And the more aggressive the HOA became, the more obvious it was that they were relying on fear, not law, to get their way. That realization marked a shift. I stopped reacting. And I started preparing to push back. The intimidation tactics had been relentless, but I wasn't about to let fear dictate the future of my mountain mansion. I decided it was time to uncover the truth behind the HOA's threats. First, I revisited the county records. Every survey, every permit, every inspection certificate, everything was in perfect order. My property boundaries were clearly defined, and not a single line of my land fell under the HOA's jurisdiction. The roads I maintained, the driveway I built, even the private utilities, they were all outside the HOA's control. Then I requested independent maps and cross-referenced them with the HOA's official documents. That's when the first cracks appeared. Their boundaries were inconsistent. Some maps showed plots that didn't exist, others claimed jurisdiction over land that was legally private. There were annotations in pen, corrections that weren't approved, even signatures that didn't belong to anyone on the official board. It got worse. I discovered several emails and internal memos through public records requests. The HOA wasn't concerned about safety or aesthetics. Their internal discussion was blunt: my mansion was a problem because it didn't conform to their vision, and if they could force me to remove it, they could assert authority over the entire upper mountain. Armed with this evidence, I hired a surveyor to perform an independent inspection. Every point they raised confirmed what I already suspected: the HOA's claims had no legal basis. The safety hazards were non-existent. The violations were manufactured. Their authority was entirely self-proclaimed. It was a turning point. The intimidation, the fines, the drones, the threats, they were all tools to scare me into submission. But the law was on my side. The HOA had been bluffing all along, counting on fear to work faster than facts. I realized the game had changed. No longer was I reacting to their attacks. Now, I had the upper hand. With documented evidence, verified surveys, and proof of their illegal overreach, I could take them to court and expose everything for what it truly was. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of control. The mountain was still mine. The mansion was still standing. And the truth, cold, undeniable, and documented, was ready to be my weapon. The question now wasn't if I could fight back. It was how soon. And I knew the moment I filed in court, the HOA's illusion of power would start to crumble. After weeks of intimidation, letters, and empty threats, I realized there was only one path forward: I had to fight back. I sat at my desk surrounded by HOA notices, fines, and their repeated threats. Each paper was a reminder of their arrogance, each line a testament to how far they were willing to go to assert control over something that was never theirs. The first step was gathering legal counsel. I reached out to a lawyer specializing in property disputes and HOA overreach. After reviewing my documentation, permits, and independent surveys, he looked up from the files and said the words I had been waiting to hear. They have no authority over your property. You're standing on solid legal ground. That moment changed everything. With my lawyer's guidance, we began preparing the case. Every email, every falsified boundary map, every drone photo, they all became evidence. Each document told the story of the HOA's bluff, their overreach, and their attempt to intimidate me into compliance. We also documented their pattern of threats, letters, fines, unannounced inspections, and even attempts to block contractors. It was overwhelming when collected together, but it painted a clear picture. The HOA wasn't concerned with rules or safety, they were trying to bully me. I knew this wouldn't be easy. The president was experienced, confident, and ruthless. She had the board behind her, and their lawyer was skilled at making threats sound legitimate. But I had one thing on my side they hadn't accounted for: the truth. I began envisioning the courtroom, not as a place of fear, but as a stage where their lies would unravel. I imagined the moment the judge would review the evidence and realize how far the HOA had strayed from legality. Preparation became my armor. I rehearsed responses, anticipated arguments, and ensured every legal document was airtight. Every threat they had made, every attempt to intimidate, became fuel to strengthen my case. By the end of that week, I had made my decision. I would not surrender my home. I would not pay fines for a crime I hadn't committed. I would take the HOA to court, expose every false claim, and ensure they could never threaten me, or anyone else, in this way again. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of clarity and power. The fight was no longer optional. It was inevitable. And when the day in court arrived, the HOA wouldn't just be facing me, they would be facing the law. And the law, unlike fear, cannot be intimidated. The day of the hearing arrived with a tension so thick it felt like the mountain fog had followed me down. The courtroom was modest, but the weight of what was about to unfold made it feel monumental. Every chair, every wooden panel, every quiet shuffle of papers carried the anticipation of a battle I had been preparing for weeks. The HOA president entered first, clipboard in hand, accompanied by their lawyer. Her steps were measured, confident. She scanned the room as if she already owned it. I noticed the subtle smirk, like she believed intimidation had carried her this far before, and it would do so again. I walked in behind my attorney, documents in hand, evidence carefully organized. My mind was steady. The fear that had stalked me for weeks had been replaced with clarity. I knew the law was on my side, and I was ready to expose every overreach the HOA had tried to force on me. The judge entered. Silence fell. Papers shuffled, a gavel tapped. The hearing began. First, the HOA lawyer spoke. Smooth, rehearsed, confident. He recited the same lines I had seen in letters: alleged violations, noncompliance, risks, and the HOA's authority over the property. Every phrase was designed to sound official, urgent, and terrifying. Then it was our turn. We presented the evidence systematically. County property records showing my land was legally private and existed long before the HOA was formed. Surveyor maps proving the HOA's claimed boundaries were inaccurate. Emails and internal memos exposing the HOA's intention to intimidate, not enforce legitimate rules. Photographs and drone records documenting unauthorized inspections and harassment tactics. Each piece was laid out clearly, with annotations, dates, and cross-references. The judge examined them closely, asking pointed questions. According to these records, the property has been in compliance with county regulations since construction, he said. And the HOA's boundaries do not encompass this land? Correct, Your Honor, my attorney replied, presenting additional maps. They are attempting to assert authority beyond their legal jurisdiction. The HOA president shifted in her seat. The confident smirk faltered. Their lawyer tried to interject, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's questions became sharper, more probing. How do you justify the demolition order when your internal communications admit the property was never under your control? There was a pause. A faint muttering among the HOA representatives. One by one, the layers of their intimidation crumbled. Letters threatening fines? Unenforceable. Drones and unannounced inspections? Illegal harassment. Demolition threats? Null and void. I watched as their carefully constructed authority collapsed in real time. The same woman who had once stared down from my gate, convinced she could force me to comply, now sat silent, eyes flicking nervously between her lawyer and the judge. By the end of the session, it was clear. The HOA had no power here. The law, backed by evidence, had spoken louder than fear ever could. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt an unshakable sense of victory. Not the final victory yet, that came with the ruling, but the moment when truth and preparation start to turn the tide. The courtroom was no longer just a room. It was the arena where intimidation met reality, and reality, as always, proved stronger. The HOA president left that day with a lesson in humility, though she likely didn't yet realize it. The next steps would confirm it for everyone. Because the law doesn't bend for threats. And I wasn't bending either. The courtroom was tense as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Every eye was fixed on the bench. I gripped the edge of the table, but my nerves were steady. After weeks of harassment, threats, and intimidation, this moment would determine whether the HOA's bluff would hold or crumble completely. The judge began by reviewing the evidence, the county property records, independent surveys, the HOA's own memos, and the documented harassment. Each piece had been meticulously presented, leaving no room for doubt. You have repeatedly attempted to exercise authority over a property that is legally outside your jurisdiction, the judge said, addressing the HOA president and board. Your actions, including unannounced inspections, intimidation tactics, and false notices, are not only unauthorized but unlawful. A wave of relief hit me. Every threat, every letter, every drone hovering over my property had been accounted for, and now it was official. The court ruled in my favor. All demolition orders were nullified. The HOA was prohibited from issuing further threats. Legal fees and fines incurred due to their actions were dismissed. A permanent injunction was placed to prevent any future interference with my property. The HOA president's expression was a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. Their power, built on fear and false claims, had evaporated under the weight of evidence and the law. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was proof that truth, preparation, and courage could stand up to intimidation. The law was a shield, and my mansion was safe. As I stepped outside the courthouse, I could almost feel the mountain itself breathe a sigh of relief. The fog seemed lighter, the air clearer. The HOA's attempt to assert control had failed completely. My mansion remained untouched, not because of wealth, influence, or connections, but because I refused to back down in the face of unjust power. Finally, justice had prevailed, and the HOA's lies were fully exposed for everyone to see. The mountain was quiet again, but this time it felt different, lighter, almost vindicated. The HOA's threats no longer hung over my mansion like a shadow. The intimidation, the fines, the inspections, and the constant anxiety had all ended. Neighbors who had once avoided me now nodded respectfully. Some even admitted they had been too afraid to challenge the HOA themselves. My victory wasn't just about preserving a house, it was about standing up for what was right, proving that no one, no organization, could overstep the law and intimidate others with impunity. The mansion itself, perched proudly above the valley, remained untouched. Every stone, every balcony, every window was a reminder of resilience. The driveway, the private road, and the surrounding pine trees, all untouched, were a testament that preparation, courage, and evidence could withstand even the most aggressive intimidation tactics. I took the time to restore normalcy, repairing minor damages from previous inspections and ensuring security measures were in place, not because I feared the HOA anymore, but because I valued peace and privacy. The HOA's board faded from my daily life. Their letters stopped, their drones disappeared, and their legal threats became meaningless. The mountain had reclaimed its silence, and I had reclaimed my home. Standing on the balcony one morning, watching the fog roll past the pine trees, I realized something profound. Victory isn't just about winning a battle, it's about refusing to let fear dictate your life. And for now, my mountain mansion was safe, my boundaries respected, and my story a warning that truth always has power over intimidation.